so for this exercise, we will start with some simple queries based on a single table to find records based on specific criteria or filters. So let's suppose this is our client table. Now remember, if I go to database tools here, look at the relationship between the entities, I'm looking at this table right here. Okay, so let's close that back. And here it is with some data. As you can see, there are some fields that are empty. We don't have probably information on the phone and email. But we definitely have client IDs, which are primary keys, so those are mandatory. We have first names and last names. We have addresses, city, state, and zip at minimum as information related to each one of these clients. Okay. Now, if you look at the table structure itself, if we go to design mode here, we look at the first name and last name, and I believe I should have made this required, but I didn't. Let me see here. Okay, this should have been a required field, which means you cannot have a client without a last name at minimum. We can change that right now just to make sure that is a constraint that is within that table. I'm going to say at minimum you need to have a first name and last name. So let me just do that. And I'm going to say this one also will be required right here. Just making sure that these two fields are required. That's not going to alter the data that we already have. So I'm going to say yes. It just means simply if I'm going to enter a new client and I skip, and let's say I go to the address here, whatever I type, and somehow I want to move to the next record, it's not going to allow me. Well, this is good because this keeps the data integrity, as good as I can based on what I can do with this table right here. So this is good. You must enter first name and last name for this to work. So I'm going to say, no, I don't want this field. You can delete it. Let's see here. Let's just do this. There you go. Just hit the arrow up here. It will remove that field, so we're done with it. Okay. So now let me just hit save, make sure everything is good. We're going to run our queries now based on this table. Okay. So now, there are tools here in Access to create a query. We've seen it using the create, and what you have here are, we've used the create a form before, create a table. This time we're going to use a create a query. So let me just close the table here. And there are several ways to do this. You could do a query design right here. Okay. And we could do, okay, all right, so let's go there. And this is what we call a QBE, or query by example. So you're going to tell it what kind of query you want. Right now, it defaults to a select query. Okay, well, that's fine. What do we want? We want the table client. So let's add it and then close. That's all we want for now. So let me expand this a little more. These are the fields for client. Okay, now if I run this query right now, there's no fields have been selected. So if I say run, you must at least have one destination field. Okay, so as you can see, could I have the first name as a destination field? Notice I've double clicked here and it appeared here. The answer is yes. That would show all of the first names of all my clients. Okay. Now, if that is all you want from this query, just to show the first name of all your clients, right? This would have been an appropriate query. From a business point of view, it doesn't make a lot of sense other than, knowing your people on a first name basis. Is there an SQL statement related to what I just did here with a query by example? Yeah. So if you go here and you go to SQL view, here he is. Select, okay, client dot first name from client. So notice the structure of your SQL statement. Table name dot field name from client. And that's all. That's the only field you selected. Now let's suppose I wanted to select more fields. And I would say client dot last name. So I can edit things right here. Last name. And let's see what happens when you do something like this. So let me run it. And there you have it. So you can modify the query from the SQL editor if you wanted to do that. Okay. Can we do it in design view instead? Yes, we can go over here and notice now it automatically added the field last name here. Can I add a city by double clicking? Yes, we've done that with the first name. Can I do it in a different way from here? Yes, you can click here and choose the field that you want. So you could do city. Now let's see how this works here. So I could go ahead and run this and you could see I have first name, last name, and city. Perfect. So let's say I don't want any of these. You can just remove them. Okay. You could cut them and you're done. Okay. Now you could start over. Now, if you double click on the asterisk, what happens? And you run this. This will show all the fields. So this is a quick way to bring down all of the fields with the asterisks here. So basically it's saying client dot asterisks here. So if we look at the query for this, here he is, client dot asterisks, which means all the fields from client. And obviously that's what we get. We get a Dynaset. This is what is called a Dynaset. It looks like a table, but it's the result of a query that has all of the fields that you want here. If that is what you want, if you want a pseudo table here. So that is not what I want. Let's go ahead and be a little more selective. So let me just cut it here. And I want first name. Again, you can also drag. Here's another one. Last name here. Okay. I want city, state. Okay. And I want to see people who live in Maryland. For now, if I run this query the way it is, it's going to show everybody with all the states they live in. Okay? So if I want to focus in particular on clients that live in Maryland. I've got quite a few here. Now, you could insert what we call a criteria right here. Okay? So right here you have a field where you can enter a criteria. Now, the way I entered Maryland as data, it was basically something like this, MD, right? So it was the abbreviated letters for the state, all caps. So let's see if that will work. So if I run this, and here it is, right? Now, had I typed Maryland, then that would not have extracted Maryland because it doesn't know what you're talking about. I don't have any field that actually have the full word Maryland in the state. And notice here, when you get a blank like this, it means there are no records that match this criteria. Okay? But let's say your data entry was inconsistent, which means you may have typed Maryland or you may have typed MD. Then that's an OR statement. So you can go back here and you could say something like this. State again here, and then MD. Just in case you may have typed Maryland instead of MD. Or you could do it. Now, this is an and. I'm sorry. So let me just clean that up. Cut. And put it right below it. MD. Do you see what it says or? Right there. That's if we want an and. So I'll get back to and in a minute. So MD. So Maryland or MD. Let's see how it works. And there you have it. Now let's look at the query statement for this. Or the SQL query. All right, the structured query language associated to that. And notice the OR statement here. It says where client state is equal to Maryland or client state equal to MD. So this is a good way to save, if you wanted a filter for all of the clients that lived in Maryland, this would be a good one. This gives you the option of, in case a user had entered the full state name in the field state as Maryland, that you should still be able to extract records that match that criteria. And for my table, I've entered only MD, but this gives me a little more flexibility. So an OR statement. So again, let me go back here in the design view. You just put it below it. That's an OR. Okay. What if I wanted to see another one where people live in Virginia as well? So notice I said or VA below it. So you can keep going. Well, let's see how that works. Perfect. So you could expand this query where you could find people who live in Maryland or Virginia. Now, obviously, you could have written also Virginia right here, full, something like this, in case a user had entered the word Virginia instead of VA. So again, the results will be exactly the same, as you can see. If I go to the query, it's going to be a little longer because my where statement has to take into account all of these OR statements right here. So every possibility and permutation of the state value for these two particular states. Okay? All right, so again, the syntax would have been select whatever field you want to show. In my case was first name, last name, and city and state. From, again, this is important because you're going to tell, okay, where did these fields come from? From this particular table. Why? Because these fields could exist in another table, the same naming convention you used. Let's say you have salespeople table that has first name and last name as well. We want to make sure we're not confusing first name and last name of salespeople with our clients, okay? So you have to be very specific as to where are those fields. And then the next line, oh, by the way, you could have written all of this in one line, but you know, it makes it nice and clear as to how you're structuring this query here, okay? So basically the selections, the for and the where statements, each one in a separate line, and notice everything ends with a semicolon at the end, indicating that is truly the end of the whole line, or this query right here, okay? Again, running it, as you can see, I could get the state of Maryland and Virginia with any permutation of these two. Either you write the full state Maryland or this full state Virginia. Okay, so let's see what else can we do. So let me just clean it up. I can take all of this stuff out. And again here, and let's say I want also zip code, and I want to find clients who live in 21218. All right, well, let's see how many clients do I have. There you go. And that zip code happened to be in Maryland. Okay, so you've got 3 people who live in Baltimore at 21218. Can we make this query now a parameter query? What do you mean by that? What I mean by that is, can we have the query ask the user to enter the zip code at runtime when you run the query? Okay? And the answer is yes. You could do something where the parameter is set up this way. So notice here I'm typing, and let me see if I could zoom here so you could see what I just did. Open bracket, close bracket. Let me see what happens here. As you can see, enter parameter value. And I'm going to type 21218. Before I do that, let me just cancel it here. Let me just remove now this value here. We don't need that. We only need this. So let's run it. And I'm going to say 21218 is my parameter, right? And sure enough, it shows me anybody living on 21218. Actually, this is a mistake because right now what it's doing, it's assigning 21218 to all my records. So let's fix it. Let's fix this here where the criteria actually is done down here. right there. Okay, so notice the brackets, it's down right here. So let's see what happens. Okay, so enter the parameter 21.21.8, exactly where you want it to be. Okay, and there you have it, much better. Okay, so you saw the first mistake I made is I try to put the bracket here. Indeed, you're going to get a parameter. You will be asked to enter a parameter value, but it's for the wrong thing. Okay, so it's going to have to be right here. Okay, so, and that is based on this criteria. Could I do it for state as well? Could I go over here and do a bracket? Okay, again, this is called a parameter query. So let me run it. And in this time, I'm going to type DC. I want to see people who live in DC. I'm going to hit enter. Sure enough, I have 2 people who live in DC. Okay, so again, I'm going to run it again. So let me just go ahead and okay. For the SQL statement, as you can see, the brackets are still there. Okay, client.state equal whatever parameter you're going to enter. So let me run it again. This time I'm going to type California. Okay, so let's see how many people live in California. Sure enough, it filters out. All right, I got to spell Los Angeles better, but as you can see, but there are in California. Okay, let's go back to the design mode here. Okay, now let's say I want to insert client ID here. Right, and I'm going to do this right here for client ID where I am going to run this query based on the client ID. All right, let's run this. It's going to say enter parameter value. Now, in here, I could say what you want in terms of, I can actually adjust this where it says enter an ID instead of enter parameter value. This is a default value for this window. But anyway, let's say I type 5. I know I have a user 5. And here she is. Now, let me go back here and type. I believe this is where you type it. Enter client ID. Let's see if that is indeed where it will appear. Invalid syntax. Let me see where to do this. So this is what happens when I do these on the fly. And I am sure there is a way. Enter ID. And I'm going to do it right here. Enter client ID. And let's see if that is how it's going to work. So let me just run this. Data type mismatch. So it's looking for a specific data type here. So, let me just do it here. Enter a client ID. Let's see if that will work. There you go. Very good. So I figured it out. So enter a client ID. Just put it right here. So let's put 5 again just to see if we get Yolanda. And here she is. All right. So let's go ahead and run it again and put somebody else. 8. And see who we get. Excellent. All right. So it's working just fine. So on this, I conclude this part. We're going to add more queries as we go forward. And we're going to have to decide on queries we're going to be saving. Right? So, for example, let me save this one, and then we're going to, in the next video, we're going to save a lot more queries than this one. Let's say we save this one, and we're going to name it find client by ID. And that's how it's going to, and let me just do it by ID. So let me just go ahead and save that. Let me close it again. And here he is, right here. Find client by ID. If I double click here, it's going to say enter a client ID. Fantastic. So I'm going to enter 3. And here's that client.